All right, I think I'll get going. Well, hi, everybody. I'm going to get going because everybody has, this is folks' lunch hour and I want to be respectful of time. So thank you very much for taking a few moments out of what's already been a very busy week, even though it's only Tuesday, and to participate in another virtual cultural event for the city of St. Paul, this time about Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. I'm Deb Calvert, the Administrative Manager in OFS and HR Liaison, and I will be your MC today. After the main presentation, there will be time for questions and answers, so please feel free to type your questions into the chat, and I will read them so everyone can hear them, and our speaker will answer them for as long as time allows. I'm excited to introduce a welcome video by our Director of Human Rights and Economic Opportunity, Val Jensen, who I knew before starting work at the city. She's an adjunct law professor at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law, where I used to work. So without further ado, please roll the tape.
No, it's like...
Was that your recording?
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this Holocaust Learning event, a presentation that is sponsored by the city's Equity Committee. Due to the COVID outbreak, last spring's annual observation of Holocaust Remembrance had to be postponed. For a time, it appeared as though the city would not be able to offer any recognition of Holocaust history this year. So I'm grateful for the Planning Committee's efforts because they did not give up on the importance of offering a Holocaust-themed event in 2020. Working with World Without Genocide, the city's longtime partners in educating the public about Holocaust history, the committee has organized a discussion about the horrific events that took place in Germany on November 9th, 1938, better known to the world as Kristallnacht, or Night of Broken Glass. Ken Engel, today's keynote speaker, brings a special perspective to the story of Kristallnacht. Ken is the son of a Holocaust survivor and is well versed in the Holocaust history. Ken's willingness to share his knowledge is particularly timely in the view of the numerous hate-based attacks that were directed at members of the Jewish faith over the past several months. Again, thank you for joining in on what promises to be an illuminating experience that, while a somber topic, it's a subject that needs all the light we can shed on it. Never again must always be our mantra.
Well, I want to give a special thanks to Director Jensen for her welcome remarks, and we appreciate her making the time to make that video very much. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Ward 2 Councilmember Rebecca Naker, who is here to introduce our keynote speaker. Rebecca, like me, is informed by her Jewish heritage and faith. Councilmember Naker grew up in St. Louis Park and earned her bachelor's degree in social studies from Harvard College. She dedicated her early career to educational equity as a middle school science teacher with Teach for America in Baton Rouge, a program officer at the Baton Rouge Area Foundation and Teach for India, and as a director of community engagement at Achieve Minneapolis. Rebecca has served on the board of Westside Community Organization and the St. Paul Planning Commission, and she founded Westsiders for Strong Schools, a neighborhood group dedicated to promoting excellent public schools on the West Side. In 2015, Rebecca was elected to be the first woman to represent Ward 2 on the St. Paul City Council. Her priorities are equity, economic development, and creating opportunities for young people. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce Councilmember Rebecca Naker.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Deb, and thank you so much to Val for that very inspiring welcome message. And I want to really thank all of you who are taking time to be here with us today. I have to tell you, I know how hard it is to pull away from those myriad tasks that we all have on our plates, from the inboxes, from the many things we have to do. It means so much to be part of a city and to be colleagues with people like you who take time to recognize and celebrate our diversity and to commemorate events that are important for each of our communities and for all of us together. It's my honor to be here today to help commemorate Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, a vitally significant event in Holocaust history that happened 82 years ago this week. As Director Jensen mentioned, we didn't have the opportunity to commemorate Holocaust Remembrance Day together this year because of COVID. But in preparing for today, I was actually thinking that in some ways, remembering Kristallnacht is especially fitting for the particular time that we're living in right now. Because the Holocaust, if you think about it, is the obvious atrocity. It's the one everyone can point to and say, never again. But Kristallnacht's importance lies in the fact that, awful as it was not what we think of as the main event. Rather, it was one among many warning signs, symptoms of a greater evil beneath the surface. It was Kristallnacht and the other pogroms, the hundreds of years of anti-Semitic laws and blood libels, the gradual repression of German Jews via discriminatory laws and outright intimidation. All of those things taken one at a time might not seem to be all that much, but together they led to the Holocaust. And I don't think there could be a better parallel for the time that we're living in right now. 2020, the year of the pandemic, the politics, and the protests, has been a wake-up call to the countless injustices that have been eating at our society for hundreds of years. We have seen the frailty of our social safety net as thousands of our brothers and sisters have nowhere but sidewalk to call home. We've seen the frailty of our social bonds as science has become politics. Public health has become what's best for me, and respecting one's political opponents has become anathema on all sides. We've seen a country we thought was the most stable democracy in the world get dangerously close to political disarray, just as Germany, the most sophisticated European country of its time, still built the gas chambers. And we've seen a startling rise in violence against people of color and people of different faiths across the country as the prejudice that is always there, but is at times more or less hidden, has been unleashed. These events of 2020 remind us that we dismiss the warning signs at our peril, and that we can't be complacent. We have to be constantly working to uproot hatred and bigotry. That, to me, is the lesson of Kristallnacht, and that's the message that we hope to convey with today's program. As any of you know who have ever planned an event before, events like this do not spring up spontaneously on your Outlook calendar. They take time, thoughtfulness, and meticulously careful tech dress rehearsals. I'm very grateful for the efforts of Deb Calvert and the other Kristallnacht Planning Committee members for taking so much time and effort to arrange this event. Dave Hunt and Igal Weinstein of Public Works, and Sean Johnson and Mike Kaplan of OTC, and our partner organization, World Without Genocide. And I am grateful to Ken, a truly extraordinary guest speaker who is joining us today. Ken's parents survived the Holocaust, and their experience as survivors has colored much of his life's work outside of his law practice. As a member of the Speakers Bureau of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and other platforms, he's given hundreds of presentations to schools, colleges, municipalities, synagogues, churches, educators, industry, and business groups about the Holocaust. He's trained thousands of survivors, children and grandchildren of survivors, community activists, and lay members on how to effectively and comfortably share their individual stories with a wide range of audiences. I should also mention that Ken is a member of the board of World Without Genocide. Ken, I am so honored to be able to learn from you today. Toda rabah and bruchim habayim. Thank you and welcome.
And thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, for being here this afternoon. Thank you, Rebecca, for those very wise and insightful remarks. Thank you to Val and Deb for your kind words and work. And thank you as well to Dave Hunt, Sean Johnson, and Mike Kaplan for your exemplary efforts. My name is Ken Engel. I am a 2G, which is an abbreviation for second generation. A 2G is a child born to a survivor or survivors of the Holocaust. My parents, Michael and Celia Engel, survived the Holocaust. Actually, Because language can be deceptive, let's start by clarifying a few words. You won't from this point hear, excuse me, I'm sorry. You won't from this point hear me use the term Holocaust. The word Holocaust is derived from the ancient Greek term for a sacred sacrificial offering, usually burned on an altar. I'm here to tell you today there was nothing sacred about what happened to the Jews in Europe just before and during World War II. The word Shoah in Hebrew means the annihilation, which I believe best describes in a single word what the Germans and their collaborators set out to do, a state-sponsored directed effort to annihilate not only the 9 million Jews who lived in Europe at the beginning of World War II, but the destruction of every one of the more than 16 million Jews in the world. I'll only occasionally refer to the Germans as Nazis. Why? Because using the term Nazi conjures up in many people's mind a stereotypical character which isn't quite human, while the term Germans refers to human beings. I prefer that word because I want to keep your attention focused on the fact that human beings, not stereotypical characters, carried out what I'm going to discuss this afternoon. As for the term Kristallnacht, I prefer to use the term Reichspogrom, which has been the default term used in Germany for the last 40 years. You're going to hear me alternate between those two terms just for convenience. Kristallnacht literally means crystal night and has been reinterpreted to mean night of broken glass. But the term Kristallnacht, with its associations of crystal as lovely, as light, as sparkling, as beautiful, as delicate, was chosen specifically. Remember the mention just a moment ago that language can deceive? By the Germans to hide, to cloak, to mask what really happened in Germany and Austria on November 9th and 10th, 1938. Reichspogrom means the pogrom in Germany and Austria ordered and orchestrated by the German Reich on those 2 days. And what is a pogrom? A pogrom is a massacre usually organized by a government of a particularly helpless ethnic group of people, particularly against the Jews. So the next question we have is, why the Jews? Why did the Germans single out the Jews for annihilation? Many theories have been offered over the years. Some claim it was Hitler's revenge for the belief that the Jews betrayed Germany, the stab in the back claim, and caused Germany to lose the First World War. Many Germans, but that wasn't the catalyzing reason for the attempted annihilation of the Jews. Others claim it was Hitler's revenge because of his rage over his beloved mother's death, Clara Hitler, in 1907 from breast cancer while she was treated by the Hitler family's Jewish physician, Edward Bloch. But that's not true either. In fact, we have a postcard Hitler sent in 1908 to Dr. Bloch after Hitler's mother died, where Hitler wrote of his extreme gratitude and reverence for Dr. Bloch because of the doctor's care of Hitler's mother. Hitler, in fact, put Dr. Bloch under special protection after Hitler came to power in 1933 and called Dr. Bloch a noble Jew. There weren't many Jews in Germany who were referred to by the Reich as a noble Jew. So no, that's not the reason either. Other people point to the inherent anti-Semitism in Germany that stretched back more than 2 centuries as the reason. But if that was the case, why didn't it happen earlier? No, that's not the reason either. The reason I believe for Hitler's murderous rage against the Jews and his vow to exterminate every Jew in the world is actually found in Mein Kampf, which was published in 2 volumes in 1925 and 1926, sold widely and wildly in Europe and around the world. Mein Kampf, which translates as My Struggle wasn't as much Hitler's autobiography as his political manifesto, which described what he intended to do to the Jews. And in Mein Kampf, the world that Hitler sketched was a world of never-ending struggle for scarce resources between beings, all beings. He especially focused on human beings, and he set up, in his view, a hierarchy, a special level of existence, where he put the German people at the very top of this pyramid of life. And he described the German people as essentially the complete expression of the excellence of evolution. He described Germans as intellectually advanced, socially adept, athletically gifted, everything that supported his view of what he called the master race. And in his view, because of Germans' position in this world of never-ending struggle, of never-ending war, Germans were entitled, Hitler said, to rule the world. They were destined to rule the world. But of course, he asked the question, well, why don't Germans rule the world? And his reason for that, he pointed to a very convenient fall person. He pointed to the Jew. Well, you might ask, what evidence did he have? The evidence he had came from his own mind and from centuries of anti-Semitic academic thought and writing. His view, but Hitler, of course, took a very special twist to this whole thing. Hitler viewed the Jew as responsible for everything that we understand to make up civilization: politics, sociology, psychiatry, psychology, science, all of these efforts Hitler viewed as created by the Jew to what? To distract the Germans from realizing their destiny. Also, Hitler said and believed and made it clear in Mein Kampf that Jews were not even human beings. They were subhuman, Untermenschen, underhumans, that he said were genetically inferior. And his fear was that if you left the Jew in the world, not only would it continue to pollute the German people with all these awful institutions that distracted the Germans from their true destiny, you would have these inferior genes that would infect the German gene pool and eventually drag down the German people to the level of other animals. And Hitler's then solution to all of this was what? He said the only way that the German people can realize their destiny is that every Jew in the world has to be destroyed. Because, he said, if you leave even one Jew left in the world, that one Jew is going to create and recreate all of these distractions that keep the German people from realizing what he believed to be their ultimate reality, their destiny. Now, this sounds crazy, I think, to most people, but we can't lose sight of the fact that there were more than 50 million people in Germany in the 1920s and 30s who swallowed this wholeheartedly. So, by January 30th, 1933, Hitler was appointed as Chancellor of Germany, and he then was put in the position to fulfill his plans to do two things: to eradicate world Jewry by establishing the supremacy of what he called the master race, and to realize an aggressive expansionist agenda to provide Germany with all the resources it needed to rapidly spread across and take over the world, to gain what he called Lebensraum, living space. And Hitler rose to power, absolute power, very quickly. What happened? Freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly were suspended 1 week after he became Chancellor. Within the first month after he rose to power, due process of law and the autonomy of state governments disappeared. By the 6th week, the German constitution was set aside in favor of Hitler ruling by decree, which was a rough equivalent of ruling by executive order, but actually and effectively rule by dictatorial power. 3 months in, equality before the law no longer existed, and the first anti-Jewish decrees were adopted. The civil service, something many of you are familiar with here, was purged of its Jews. Teachers, professors, doctors, nurses, and other civil servants were shown the door. In the 4th month, labor unions and the Social Democratic Party, one of the leading political parties in Germany and a prime enemy of the Nazi Party, were abolished. By the 5th month, all the remaining political parties but the Nazi Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, were disbanded. On May 10th, 1933, which was the 100th day of Hitler's swift ascent to power, 25,000 books were burned in the square of the Staatsoper, the State Opera in Berlin. And these were books written largely by Jewish authors. The German writer Heinrich Heine wrote 110 years earlier that a nation that burns books will ultimately burn people. In Germany, only 8 years separated the burning of books in 1933 and the burning of people in 1941. We move forward more than 5 years from that swift rise to power to November 7th, 1938, 2 days before Kristallnacht. Germany's first significant steps toward what Hitler in 1942 called the final solution to the Jewish question in Germany had long been underway by then. But on November 7th, a 17-year-old Polish Jew, Herschel Greenspan, distraught because he had just found out his parents, who had lived and were citizens of Germany since 1911, were being deported from Germany to the Polish border. He walked into the German embassy in Paris, looks for but can't find the German ambassador, and instead he shoots and kills Ernst von Roth, a third-tier German diplomat. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi Party Minister of Propaganda, to his delight, found the excuse to instigate a vicious, pitiless war against the German Jewish community of 525,000 people. Goebbels meets later that day with high-ranking German officials and tells them that, quote, world Jewry, end quote, has conspired to assassinate von Roth. Goebbels' words are shorthand clearly understood to be the command for unleashing large-scale rioting in Germany and Austria against the Jews. And the unmistakable word then goes out: we are going to have our way with the Jews. Senior Nazi Party members, under Goebbels' direct order, used Greenspan's killing of von Roth as a pretext to carry out a nationalist riot, a pogrom on a scale not seen before in European history. Goebbels claimed that Kristallnacht to be a justifiable and spontaneous response by the German population, which was a perfect pretext for that attack on the Jews as far as the German party was concerned. Across Germany and Austria, Nazi Party officials, members of the SS, members of the paramilitary SA, commonly known as stormtroopers, and the Hitler Youth were mobilized and ordered to attack, loot, and destroy Jewish-owned businesses, homes, and apartment buildings. Synagogues and Jewish cemeteries were designated as special targets of desecration. Many members of the SA and Hitler Youth were, in fact, instructed to dress in civilian clothes to support the fiction that the Reichspogrom was the expression of what they called outraged public reaction. Explicit instructions were given out to all fire departments. Don't put out the fires set in synagogues and Jewish-owned businesses, homes, and properties, but put out the fires in the buildings on either side. Make sure those fires don't burn down adjoining buildings, and make sure German property isn't touched. And the mobs of rioters were specifically told no measures were to be taken to endanger non-Jewish German life or property. The Nazi Party went quickly into action. Late in the evening of November 9th, 1938, 82 years ago yesterday, Kristallnacht was launched. By 3 a.m. on November 10th, it metastasized into officially sanctioned looting across all of Germany and Austria. More than 1,000 synagogues were set on fire. Many of them burned through the night. Hundreds of them were destroyed. Hitler Youth and SA members shattered the shop windows of more than 7,500 Jewish-owned businesses whose broken glass littered the sidewalks and streets in front of them, hence the term, the night of broken glass. But generally, while those businesses were damaged, they weren't destroyed because you don't destroy what you're going to take over in the near future. And that was the Germans' plan. Jewish schools, homes, apartment buildings, hospitals, even orphanages were subject to frenzied destruction and looting. In some cities, between 75 and 90% of Jewish homes were vandalized and left uninhabitable. Thousands of Jews were left homeless, and emergency shelters were set up by Jewish aid groups in Vienna and Berlin to try to address the problem. The Reichspogrom was especially destructive in Berlin and Vienna, where the two largest Jewish communities in the German Reich were found. Some survivors described the attacks as sounding like bombs going off. You can imagine how they responded when they heard bombs going off nearby, or what they thought were bombs. Hundreds of Jews were murdered. The official count was 91. Subsequent records show more than 400 Jews were murdered. There were hundreds of rapes during Kristallnacht and hundreds of suicides from despair and hopelessness by Jews during and in the aftermath. So what did non-Jewish German bystanders do during Kristallnacht? They, together with firefighters, came to watch the burning of the synagogues. They brought their children to watch the flames. They cheered the destruction and looting they witnessed. The passivity of the non-Jewish German public, the bystanders, encouraged the Nazi regime to believe that that public was prepared for and expected more radical measures. The regime indulged that expectation with a series of measures alluded to by Rebecca, designed to fulfill Hitler's goal, to make Germany Judenfrei, Jew-free. The police were ordered to arrest as many Jews as local jails could hold during Kristallnacht. More than 30,000 Jewish men and teenagers between 16 and 60 years old were arrested. This was the first time of mass arrests of Jews in Germany simply because they were Jews. Those arrested were sent to Dachau, Buchenwald, where my mother was imprisoned in 1945 after being a slave laborer in Auschwitz, Sachsenhausen, and other concentration camps. Hundreds of those 30,000 men and teenagers died in those camps as a result of the brutal treatment they suffered. But ironically, the Germans found they created an unexpected problem, an economic one. On November 12th of 1938, a group of German officials were called to an urgent meeting. The German finance minister said it will take 2 years of foreign exchange to pay for the window glass that needs to be replaced. We can't do this, the finance minister said. We can't afford to do this. Senior representatives of the insurance industry were brought in and told the group their industry was facing a terrible problem. Virtually every property destroyed or damaged was insured. The ultimate losers after claims are paid wouldn't, of course, be the insurance industry, but would be their customers, their policyholders, whose policy premiums would have to be jacked up to cover the losses. Who then, the officials asked, can be made to pay for the losses? The insurers said they have to pay the claims because if they don't, no one will ever buy an insurance policy from them again. An insidious solution was reached. The insurers agreed they will pay the claims filed, with 2 exceptions. The 30,000 Jews interned in concentration camps had no way to file claims, so they weren't a headache for the insurance industry. And if any other Jew filed a claim for property damage during the Reichspogrom, the insurer would immediately report the Jew to the local police, who would immediately arrest that Jew and throw him into a concentration camp, thereby cutting short any claim. In addition, the Jews of Germany were ordered to reimburse the insurers in full for their losses. The German Jewish community was required to pay a fine as what was called an atonement tax, because the German government declared that Kristallnacht was the fault of the Jews. That fine was 1 billion Reichsmarks, the equivalent then of $400,000, and the equivalent today of what would be $7.75 billion. It was a deliberate attempt to bankrupt the communities in order to clean up and pay for the damage. There was yet another impact on Germany's Jews, a very poignant one. Understanding they were largely at the mercy of the German state, and in most cases lacking the arms and training to mount large-scale active resistance, a program started soon after Kristallnacht and ended in 1940. The program was called the Kindertransport, the children's transport. German Jewish parents painfully, wretchedly understood they could no longer protect their children. And those parents loved their children so much, they were willing to put their children in the hands of unseen strangers in England so their children could survive. Approximately 7,500 German Jewish children made that journey. Few ever saw their parents again. How did the United States respond to the news of the Reichspogrom? Virtually every American from nearly every religious stripe condemned what the Germans had done because they saw it as an interference with freedom of religion. 90% of American adults opposed Kristallnacht. Newspapers across the country ran front-page banner headlines about the Nazi assault on the Jews. President Franklin Roosevelt, in protest, recalled America's ambassador to Germany, who did not return until after the end of World War II. But public sentiment on the issue of immigration barely moved, and nothing else was done. Despite the danger the Jews of Europe faced, the U.S. Senate wasn't interested in liberalizing immigration quotas. I'm echoing what Rebecca said. American policy didn't change. The line was, we hate what the Germans are doing to the Jews, Americans said, but we don't want the Jews here. America's doors remained largely closed to Jews until a trickle of Jews were allowed to emigrate into upstate New York in the fall of 1944. Perhaps the most chilling headline was in the Los Angeles Examiner on November 23, 1938, 2 weeks after Kristallnacht. Nazis warn world Jews will be wiped out unless evacuated by democracies. Not enough people apparently paid attention to that headline. Public attitudes in Germany now toward the Jews hardened after the Reichspogrom. The German government signaled and tested the world's appetite to take in the Jews and found that the world had little appetite for us. Jews wanted to get out of Germany and Austria, but rarely could find a safe harbor to sail into. The doors were slammed in our faces. What Germany did on November 9th and 10th, 1938, was to show the world by the most physical means imaginable how much Germany was willing to do to begin to tear the Jewish community out of the German Reich. And what they also were doing was, again, testing the world to see what the world would accept of German conduct. And with the exception of a few headlines and a few outrage comments, little or nothing was done by the world until near the end of World War II. This, then, is what many people mean when they talk about the Reichspogrom being the beginning of the Shoah, the beginning of the annihilation of the Jewish people in Europe. This is what Michael Berenbaum, who is a widely respected historian of the Shoah, refers to when he talks about Kristallnacht as being the end of the beginning and the beginning of the end. As Rebecca said, Kristallnacht was not the first step. It was only one of many steps toward the murder by the end of World War II of almost 6 million Jews, 2/3 of the 9 million Jews who lived in Europe at the beginning of World War II. Jews have learned painfully that if one minority isn't safe, no minority is safe. Hitler told the world what he was going to do to the Jews. And what I think was more important than what he said and wrote and meant was that he was largely not believed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. That was really an incredible presentation, and I can't thank you enough. Very well done. And we have more than 15 minutes. You spoke fast. We have time for questions and answers. And just because of the technical difficulties that might arise from people unmuting, I'm asking that you type questions into the chat, and I will read them if you type them in. I have a couple that came in earlier. If you really want to speak, I think you're able to do that. But I have a couple of also Sean Johnson just gave us a little signal about where to put your questions. So the first question is about political and social conditions that made Kristallnacht possible. Do you think it could have been preventable? That's the first question.
Well, it's a question asking about a theoretical condition, and so we can only speculate. Frankly, Hitler was going to have his way sooner or later. That was clear. The German nation was mobilized in this direction. In fact, Goebbels did an excellent effort of conditioning the German people in two major ways. One was to show them that by the Nazi Party turning Germany around, the economy improved, jobs increased, economic conditions rose, that the German people were being rewarded to follow and go along with what the party wanted. So Goebbels, as part of that, instilled in the population the idea that to promote all of this goodwill, to keep all these good things coming, people were conditioned to do what they believed. The phrase was to do the Führer's will. And it's a subconscious approach. It was very, very effective. But people not only were conditioned, they were rewarded to continue behaving in those ways. So the nation wasn't going to show any real resistance to what Hitler was doing. In fact, if anything, Hitler had created this great mass of allies. The second was the German economy, despite what it looked like from the outside, was not in good shape. That because Germany was just using the term juggernaut, which is a bad pun, and I apologize, but had greatly increased its military power when Hitler came into office. Doing that, building those battleships, creating or manufacturing those shells and bullets, that all took money. And Germany didn't have the money to do that on its own. It couldn't raise it in taxes from individuals and businesses enough to cover those obligations. So Hitler had to look elsewhere. And Hitler always had his eyes trained on two things: on Ukraine for its wheat and its oil, and on Russia for its vast resources. And I'm not talking about, I'm only talking about the portion of Russia, because the remaining portion of the USSR was very unmanageable and not as rich in resources. Hitler wanted those two areas. He also wanted to conquer all the territory and the people to the east first, because those people would be used as slave labor until their usefulness no longer exceeded the cost to keep them alive. And so they eventually would be wiped out through so-called natural or unnatural means. They thus weren't there. The land that they occupied would now become available to the German people to expand east. So because he had those goals, and his ultimate goal again was to take over the entire world, nobody was to be left untouched. We weren't. We were targeted to be conquered. The Swiss and the Swedes, who lived in so-called neutral countries that really weren't neutral toward Germany during the war, they would also be wiped out when their usefulness no longer existed. So I believe that the question, again, is asking a hypothetical, but I think sooner or later, Hitler was going to realize his goals, and the only thing that would stop him would be a greater opposing military force, which turned out to be the Soviet Union, the United States, Great Britain, and the remaining allies. It's a long answer to the question. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, that's the kind of answer we need. We don't, I mean, we're trying to dig in a little bit here, so it's very much appreciated. I have another question that came in earlier, but I'll read the most recent one. It says, there is a lot of talk regarding the rise of nationalism in the United States and Europe. Are there any similarities that you see between the rise of nationalism in the US and Europe and the rise of Nazi fascism in Germany?
Well, this question was asked even before Trump won the 2016 election, and people were worried a great deal about so-called clear parallels on how Trump was going to rule and what happened in Germany. And I tried to outline in Hitler's first 5 months how quickly he rose to power. I mean, there were three major freedoms that we enjoy under the Constitution that were wiped out in the first week in Germany. That hasn't happened here. Our Constitution, battered as it may be, is in place. It has not been abrogated and now left to decision-making by executive order or dictatorial power. There are very alarming trends that have been growing, however: greater intolerance, greater white supremacist activities, and not just by words, by deeds, both in the United States, in Europe, in South America, in Asia, in the Middle East, just about every area, probably with the exception of Japan and Australia, has been witnessed now to greater rising white supremacist and extreme activity, political activity. Where is it going? If I had a crystal ball, I could tell you. I don't think anybody knows where it's going, but I think the biggest thing that will help, if not stop this, slow this, so eventually it can be reversed, is information, education, awareness. People are more and more informed of what's been going on, and this kind of conduct still is offensive to what we used to refer to as the basic American character. We believed in fairness. We believed in so-called equal opportunity, which really wasn't equal at all. It was only equal if you were white and male. But we believe in so-called fairness and that everybody has a chance to do better. Hopefully, that attitude will not disappear. Hopefully, people in this country will act and continue to act on those precepts, and hopefully other countries, inspired by their own political systems. The UK is a parliamentary system, not like ours, but the UK, its citizens, despite Brexit, still believe in general senses of fairness. So the hope is, no, those won't happen.
Councilmember Naker says, you mentioned the apathy and the passivity of the German people in the face of Kristallnacht. What could German bystanders have done in the wake of Kristallnacht, given the assaults on the German Constitution that would have been effective?
Well, actually, what they did following Kristallnacht was very effective. They continued doing what they were doing, only they showed less and less tolerance for minorities. Because remember, they were rewarded for their behavior, for acquiescing to the government's power. They saw themselves as becoming more and more members of the haves. And once you have a taste of that, especially after going through the Great Depression in Germany in the 20s and early 30s, and the incredibly horrific political divisions, once you see that and you have suddenly, you have good times that have returned. You have money to spend. You get to go to Bad Karlsberg to enjoy the spas there. You get to do things you weren't able to do. The German people, by and large, were not inclined to oppose what was going on. They were not just bystanders, they were enablers, because there's an old story that I tell. People ask, well, I'm only one person talking about the Shoah. It's just, I only am an individual. I don't have political power. I can't stand up to the state. How could I possibly do anything to reverse what caused the Shoah to happen and what actually happened? And this especially comes from junior and senior high school students. And I tell them when speaking with them, you actually have a great deal more power than your parents or your teachers want you to know that you have. And that power is you have the ability to choose. So to illustrate it, it's, okay, you're with a group of friends. Somebody makes a joke about someone else based on the other person's being perceived to be different or other. Race, religion, color, creed, pick your category, doesn't matter. Everybody in the crowd laughs. You have three choices what you're going to do. The first is you laugh along with them. You think the joke's funny, or you want to give the appearance of thinking the joke is funny because you don't want to seem that you're different from everybody else. You don't want other people to really know how you feel. You don't feel safe to express yourself. Whatever the reason is, you laugh with everybody else. And by laughing, what you're doing is you're enabling and underwriting the poison in the joke. Your second choice, as a bystander, is you can stay quiet. And you think there's sanctuary in not saying anything because you're not laughing, you're not encouraging, but actually what you're doing by your silence is, again, you're enabling and supporting what was said because you're not raising your voice. Your third choice is the hardest one for most of us, and this is where choice comes in starkly, is you can turn to the person who told the joke and you can say to them, look, I don't like hearing that kind of stuff. I don't think it's fair. You wouldn't like it if I called you that. Don't say that. Don't say that around me. Don't carry around that crap. And what you don't know are two things. One, whether anybody in the group was heard or was influenced by what you said. But two, the odds are very good that sooner or later, somebody, even the joke teller, is going to resonate to what you said and say, yeah, Susie was right. It's wrong what I did. I don't want to make fun of other people. I wouldn't like it. And that's kind of a ripple effect. The way that I view change that happens in the world is between people, not between states or nations or political parties. That the ripples go out from this and they sooner or later will affect other people. It may be a naive view, but I've seen it. Not in a laboratory. I've seen it in real practice. And sometimes, not always, sometimes it works. That, I think, is maybe the best way anybody, German public then or anybody else, can counter the insidious effects of prejudice, because that's really what drove the Shoah. It was prejudice. And too many people decided not to do anything about it, and too many other people decided, for varying reasons, especially because they were rewarded in some way, I'm going to hitch on to this wagon, and I'm going to ride it all the way because I'm being rewarded for what I'm doing.
There's one more question that came in earlier, and it's a little bit it's a little bit like some of the previous questions, but it's more specific to the Twin Cities. It says, how would you compare the Reich pogrom or Kristallnacht to the recent vandalism in the Twin Cities?
Boy, now there's a loaded question. Okay, there's no comparison, first of all, in my opinion, because remember, the Reichspogrom was state orchestrated and state directed. The rioting that happened in the Twin Cities, in Portland, in Chicago, in Baltimore, in Milwaukee, and elsewhere in the United States was not state directed. In fact, in a number of instances, including in the Twin Cities, we actually had members of white supremacist groups who traveled across state lines and acted as instigators to push along the rioting. I don't think there's any comparison at all. And I don't see the rioting was part of an effort, as Kristallnacht was to punish, to decimate, to bankrupt a major component of a nation's population. In this case, it was people, a lot of people, frustrated that they weren't being heard and realizing the only way, similar to what happened in Minneapolis in '67, similar to what happened in Detroit and Chicago and elsewhere in '65 and '66 and '67 and '68, the only way that they were going to be heard was through violence. That's how they were going to have attention paid to them and their cause. I don't think it's the right way to go about it, but I'm not in a position to tell them they're wrong from their standpoint. I don't believe that's the way to solve things. But I think a lot of those people felt there's no other choice, there's no other recourse that we have to try to get things changed except by doing this to start getting attention to this problem. We've done this many times. It hasn't worked before. Maybe this time will be the key.
Well, I don't have any other questions. We still have time for one more. If somebody wants to type something in or even unmute and ask a question. I'm going to ask a question. So specifically talking about maybe violence against specific groups in the United States. There has been vandalism specifically directed at places of worship. And specifically here in the Twin Cities, I think about vandalism and even incendiary devices being thrown through the windows of mosques, and vandalism at Jewish institutions and threat. And certainly my daughter worked at the Jewish Community Center right after the 2016 election, and they had bomb threats at Jewish community centers across the country. And so how do you compare the US response, the sort of popular response to that, to the popular response in Germany and Austria?
Well, you actually have two different types of responses, I think, in the United States. The response by police forces and police personnel, and I'm talking about police chief level and the like. There have been ongoing efforts made over the last 15 years in Minneapolis and in St. Paul, where the police are working very closely with not just Jewish organizations, but Muslim organizations, other minority organizations, to do two things: to tighten and better the bond between those two entities, because if you can increase that, you can generate trust, and if you can generate trust, it's a lot easier to work together. The second is that you have a situation where you have an environment the last half decade where it is now more acceptable to express yourself less than respectfully, not just verbally, but through action. Charlottesville in 2017 was one of the early examples in the last 5 years where anti-Semitic hatred, not to be redundant, dismissal and disregard for anybody who wasn't seen as entitled whites, that's been growing, and that's been fed a great deal by our political institutions. At the same time, you have, again, more and more people are becoming aware of this. And it wasn't just by accident that I included in the presentation that what Jews have learned is that when one minority isn't safe, no minority is safe. And that's a lesson that I think more and more people are realizing, and they're going with it. But you have an opposing force to this, and you have people who have been ensconced or believe they've been ensconced in positions of power and privilege, and they don't want that threatened, and they don't want these interlopers and outsiders coming in and taking a piece of the pie from them. So they're less inclined to see this as an unjust situation and more inclined to regard it as a personal and group attack. So how do you address that? Well, that's not an easy one, and that's not going to happen in a week, and it's not going to go away in a year, in my opinion. It's going to take a long time, because until you get people to start understanding we are in this together, we are supposedly working toward common goals, until that happens, you're going to have the same fractionalism which existed in Germany and Austria, the haves versus the have-nots. The haves didn't want to give up what they had, quote unquote, earned. The have-nots had no power to wrestle anything away, including political justice, from the haves. How do you resolve that situation? Well, we saw one way it was resolved with the extermination of 2/3 of European Jewry. And let's not forget, 20 million people in Europe were murdered during World War II because of who they were, not because they were soldiers, but because of who they were as civilians. There's a song called Iron Hand that Mark Knopfler wrote. Mark Knopfler, who founded a group called Dire Straits that some old ones of us remember. And the closing lyric of the song is, "We haven't changed since ancient times." Now, that's a pessimistic view, maybe, but there are times where I can't disagree with that. We still follow these same ruts. And in fact, the better technologically we get, the easier it is for us to follow those because we're more and more remote from the actual impact of the action.
Well, thank you so much, Ken, and for everyone for participating. Thank you to Director Valerie Jensen for the introduction, Council Member Rebecca Naker for her introduction of our speaker and her very poignant words, to my fellow committee members, Dave Hunt, Igor Weinstein, Mike Kaplan, and Sean Johnson, and to everyone who joined. We got some wonderful comments, which I'm hoping to send along to Ken. We had over 50 participants, so this was very exciting, and many people had never heard of this event, so I think that we really did help educate people in the city of St. Paul, and I hope they'll share that with everyone that they know. And thank you everyone again for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.